The year is 1860. Trouble is brewing in the United States. The nation has just been rocked by the secession of South Carolina. Almost a mirror image of the nation, Arkansas is virtually split in half. Within months, the state will become engulfed in civil war. What caused the split in Arkansas? How did geography play a role? And what effect did the war have on the young state? In search of answers, I'll explore the grounds of a national military park, journey to a Confederate capital frozen in time, and search for evidence of a nearly forgotten battle. So watch out. History's coming. Abraham Lincoln has just been elected President of the United States. But would those states be united for long? Hi, I'm Rob Reep. Lincoln received just over 40% of the popular vote, and many Southerners had vowed that if he was elected, they would secede from the Union. Within days of his election in December 1860, the unity of the nation was shaken by the secession of South Carolina. Mississippi, Florida, and Alabama followed suit. After a failed pre-war peace conference held in Washington in February of 1861, Union troops under the command of U.S. Army Major Robert Anderson relocated to Fort Sumter, South Carolina. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, Confederate forces opened fire on the fort. The bombardment lasted 34 straight hours. The fort was surrendered on April 13th. War was now a reality. Meanwhile in Arkansas, political lines had already been drawn. The state's population was split almost in half, just as much as the Union as a whole. But I'm wondering what reasons lie behind this dramatic split throughout the state. To answer this question, I've come to the historic Lakeport Plantation, run by my alma mater, Arkansas State University. Lakeport Plantation is the only remaining Arkansas plantation home on the Mississippi River. In fact, today it remains a working plantation. Started in the 1830s, the plantation was kept by slaves owned by Kentuckian Joel Johnson. His son would settle the land and build this home around 1858. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, many Southerners went bankrupt, but surprisingly, not the Johnsons. Like many other plantation owners, the Johnsons stood to lose a vast amount of wealth if and when the war didn't go their way. The Johnsons had been part of a mass migration of wealthy citizens from the northern portion of what was considered the southern states. Like many other wealthy landowners, they jumped at the opportunity to buy up more land in the new frontier farming land known as the Mississippi Delta. I'm walking on land that was once part of the Johnsons' farm. It hasn't changed a lot since the 1850s. It's still very heavily farmed. But unlike using these humongous rigs today, the Johnsons in the 1850s would have used slave labor. Arkansas was split politically during the Civil War, and that political division was based upon a geographical division. This map provides a visual for the political unrest. The Arkansas Delta region in the east was the only area that large slave labor was needed. Most Arkansans did not own slaves. In fact, most citizens of the state at the time only owned 1 to 2 slaves, if any. This demographic split meant that many non-slave owning whites in the northwest region of Arkansas had no cause to break from the Union. However, in the farming delta, many feared for their financial stability in the event of the abolition of slavery. making this a highly contested state. Only 12% of white citizens in Arkansas owned 20 or more slaves, which marked the point at which one became known as a planter. This small percentage led to a rather mild reaction to Abraham Lincoln's election when compared to other southern states. When the issue of secession was brought before the Arkansas legislature, it was voted down several times by a bare majority. While most Arkansans supported slavery, they were not entirely keen on secession, and most remained somewhat loyal to the Union. Governor Henry Rector, who was elected in 1860, was pressing for war. The state's legislature reconvened on May 6, 1861. With Arkansas at this time producing more than 26 million pounds of cotton, and that cotton relying on slave labor, only 5 legislators voted against secession, all of which were from the northwest region of the state. The chair of the assembly urged the remaining 5 holdouts to make the vote unanimous. 4 of the 5 agreed and changed their vote. But one man, Isaac Murphy from Huntsville, refused. The move by Murphy drew hisses from the large crowd in the upper gallery of the old State House. But the widow of former Arkansas State Legislator Frederick Trapnell, Mrs. Martha Trapnell, tossed a bouquet at the feet of Isaac Murphy. Even after Murphy's passionate speech, the majority had voted to secede. Arkansas had chosen sides. No longer was Little Rock's old State House a Union States government building. It was now the seat of a Confederate capital. But how long would that status last for Little Rock? Many today falsely believe Arkansas to have played a meaningless role in the war. But a closer examination reveals that Arkansas was crucial in Civil War strategy. The state's position alongside the Mississippi River created a huge problem for the Union, whose plan for Southern defeat was called the Anaconda Plan. The North wanted to cut the South in half by taking control of the Mississippi River, and then, through Atlantic and Gulf blockades and troop advancements, would wrap itself around the South like an anaconda and squeeze the life out of the Confederacy. The Mississippi River in the 1860s acted as a major blood vein for the Confederacy. Without it, supplies could not move into the southern states from the Gulf of Mexico. No fighting was to take place in Arkansas for the remainder of 1861, but by March of 1862, that would change. To get a better picture of how and where Arkansas evolved into a major battleground, I've decided to drive to Pea Ridge National Military Park near the Arkansas-Missouri border in the northwestern corner of the state. I've contacted park guide Troy Banzef, who has agreed to share his expertise about the battle and to show me around the battlefield. I need you to clear something up for me. I've been studying the North's Anaconda Plan, which was of course focused on gaining control of the Mississippi River. But I'm wondering what led up to a battle taking place in the northwestern part of Arkansas, which is a pretty good ways away from the Mississippi River, in early 1862.
In 1861, in August of 1861, you have Missouri, which is it's a neutral state. It remained in the Union. However, there were slaves in the state of Missouri. The state itself had not seceded. What you had was, under the command of Major General Sterling Price, you had this pro-Confederate militia of about 20,000 troops in Missouri. In August of 1861, these 20,000 troops, plus the combined force of General Ben McCullough, who led some regular Confederate troops from Arkansas, they teamed up at the Battle of Wilson's Creek, and that was a Confederate victory at Wilson's Creek in Springfield of 1861. After that battle, Ben McCullough brought his regular Confederate troops back down into northwest Arkansas, and Sterling Price decided to push on up into northern Missouri.
Troy tells me that throughout the summer and fall of 1861, Sterling Price and his Missouri State Guard steadily fell back towards the Springfield, Missouri area. In the winter of 1861 to 1862, 20,000 pro-Confederate forces around Springfield basically tried to bottle up tens of thousands of Union troops in Missouri. This mattered because the state of Missouri had the Mississippi River down its eastern side and was in close conjunction with the state of Illinois. Missouri acted as a major depot for sending Union troops out to various departments throughout the United States.
As long as these 20,000 troops remained in southwestern Missouri, they would keep these tens of thousands of Union troops bottled up that could be used elsewhere. So on Christmas Day of 1861, Major General Samuel R. Curtis was placed in charge of all the Union forces west of the Mississippi River, and he was tasked by General Henry Halleck with pushing the Missouri State Guard out of the state of Missouri, thus freeing up these thousands of troops that could be used ultimately for what would become the Grants River Campaign.
By the 16th of February, he had pushed Sterling Price out of Missouri and all the way into Arkansas. Once Price made it to Arkansas, he once again hooked up with Ben McCullough. Both of their armies moved south. Curtis then spread his 10,500-man army out over northwest Arkansas.
Price and McCullough didn't get along and continuously bickered with one another, and were always sending telegrams to Jefferson Davis complaining about each other. To help that situation, Davis sent Earl Van Dorn out here to take overall command of the Confederate forces in the Arkansas area. And Van Dorn had made up his mind that he was going to move north and defeat Curtis's army. And that's on March 7th. That was the first day of the Battle of Pea Ridge. Happened right here.
It's been my experience in the past that to really understand any battle, you've got to see the geography of the battlefield. Do you mind if we go out and take a look at Pea Ridge?
Not at all. Let's go.
We hop in Troy's vehicle and head out to see the battle site.
You got a beautiful day to come out here and do this.
It sure is. I was scared we were going to have snow all over the ground, which might have been pretty.
That would have been not well. It would have been historically accurate. So, but
Was there snow on the ground?
There would have been some snow on the ground. The week before the Battle of Pea Ridge, it was bitterly cold. Rain, sleet, snow, sub-freezing temperatures, and then, of course, to make things worse, the day of the battle, the sun popped out, and then it was above freezing. So all these dirt roads and everything that had a perfect time to freeze over now just turned into quagmires as these armies are trying to struggle around up and down these primitive roads. So.
Now, are these roads built along?
We're actually on the Telegraph Road here historically, and then it actually shoots off the park. You can see the little rise there. The Telegraph Road actually shoots out of the park this direction,
right,
and then travels on intermittently all the way basically to Fort Smith.
So what is this? Our first stop is the old Elkhorn Tavern, one of the actual homes that sat on the battlefield during the Battle of Pea Ridge. It sits directly on the Telegraph Road, which was the main road through the area at the time. Troy tells me that Elkhorn Tavern was used as a makeshift hospital by the Confederate forces during the battle. The Cox family, which owned the building at the time, rode out the battle from the basement. Confederate General Earl Van Dorn used the tavern yard as his headquarters.
What Van Dorn did in the Little Sugar Creek Valley that night, where Curtis could actually see the campfires, Van Dorn told his army to go ahead and act like they were bedding down for the night, and they lit all their campfires up through the Little Sugar Creek Valley. And then under the cover of darkness, he slipped out of the Little Sugar Creek Valley and then made this 8-mile trek around Curtis's flank to attack him from the rear. Unbeknownst to Van Dorn at the time, that there were some actually Union cavalry that had chopped down timber blockades along the roads in a couple of spots that slowed Van Dorn's army down to a crawl, so that by daylight on the morning of March 7th, when Van Dorn fully intended to be on the tour on the Telegraph Road behind Curtis's army, his head of his column was just about 2 miles north of here. Van Dorn had been delayed so much by that morning of March 7th that he ordered Ben McCullough and his half of the army, about 8,000 troops, to double back and cut across the battlefield on a little not so well known road called the Ford Road. And the idea would be that McCullough would save some time by cutting down the Ford Road, and meanwhile Van Dorn with Sterling Price and the Missouri State Guard would come from the north down the Telegraph Road, and the fields open up essentially where Ford Road and Telegraph Road meet. And the idea was that the entire army could be in a line of battle across these open fields, and they would be straight smack dab behind Curtis's army still down at the Little Sugar Creek area.
McCullough was killed. Did Albert Pike take control?
McCullough, of course, being the one in charge of that Confederate force, was killed. Then command went to his second command, General James McIntosh, who was also killed about 15 minutes after McCullough was killed. The third in command was Colonel Louis Hebert, one of the brigade commanders I'd mentioned earlier, and he was actually captured in the fighting at Morgan's Woods over at Leetown. So essentially what you have at Leetown is 8,000 Confederates standing around in the woods waiting for someone to take command. And there was actually no clear leadership over there. Albert Pike could have taken command and probably should have, but I feel that probably due to the fact that they were leading Cherokee troops, that there was probably some prejudice involved and some fighting amongst the officers. So there was really no clear leadership over there before essentially the units themselves started breaking off on their own.
How many troops were killed at Pea Ridge?
Of the 23,500 troops that were here, all together on both sides, the Federals counted 1,386 killed, wounded, and missing once the battle was over. The Confederates, it's a little different on the Confederates. They didn't keep that accurate of records, but the best guesstimate that we can have is about 2,000 to 2,500 killed, wounded, and missing. So,
what gives the Battle of Pea Ridge its significance?
The Battle of Pea Ridge helped secure the state of Missouri for the Union. It effectively held back any more large-scale invasions, Confederate invasions of Missouri. And once that Missouri was secure, it freed up those thousands of troops that were already Union troops that were in Missouri to be used for other theaters in the war. And also, this is a very early war battle, and the Lincoln administration was in desperate need of some victories. And this was one of the first victories for the Lincoln administration. So Pea Ridge was important not only strategically but politically as well.
Troy went on to tell me that the war was not going well for the South, even further south. The North had captured several forts along the river and had captured New Orleans by April. Vicksburg was the only Confederate stronghold left. In December of 1862, the Union won the Battle of Prairie Grove. With Confederate forces in the state in total disarray, many Arkansans felt that the state should now secede from the Confederacy and form a lone state, a nation of Arkansas. However, 1863 brought a severe blow to the Confederate hopes for the state. Helena fell to Federal troops, and Little Rock would be taken as well. Confederate Arkansas now looked to be nearly destroyed. With Little Rock taken, a new state capital would have to be found. It would first move to Hot Springs. Union forces continued to push south, and the capital was moved down the Southwest Trail to Washington, Arkansas. I want to find out more about the Confederate capital in Washington, Arkansas. I've set up a meeting with Josh Williams, who plans to show me around the original Confederate Capitol building. Josh, as we're walking down the street here in the courtyard of old Washington, I'm noticing that it's not a bustling town anymore. but I'm pretty sure it was different in the 1860s. Can you shed some light on what Washington was like during the Civil War era?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it was a bustling town during that time period, particularly when this became the Confederate capital of Arkansas when they moved here in 1863. You had people living in barns, any space that was available, basically having tents just out here in the fields, all those different types of places. Everything from the way the newspapers described was filled up. There was no room left.
What makes Washington such an ideal location for moving a capital to?
There's 5 trails that intersect at this place on the hill. One of the terms that it was called was the Hill of the 5 Trails, predominantly. And one of them is the main thoroughfare, the main road through Arkansas at that time was the Military Road, connected basically St. Louis all the way to Texas, to the Red River. So that was one particular point why this particular place. Second was, it was probably the furthest town southwest, in the southwest corner of the state, that they could be, where they could still be in Arkansas, but in case if the federal soldiers did come down this far, they were able to move across the Red River and get into Texas, possibly in that particular case. Other reason, of course, is that there was a building already here, the Confederate Capitol. It was the courthouse that was used for Hempstead County, and it was ready to be moved in, and it was a space they could use.
Is this the original, or has it been reconstructed?
Yes, this is the original courthouse that was built here in 1836 for Hempstead County.
Can we go inside and maybe take a look?
Sure, let's go.
Wow, this is something else.
Yes, this is the interior of the 1836 courthouse, as we call it. That was here in Hempstead County. Like we said, this is the original building. And on the inside here, of course, you have the courtroom where the judge would sit in the jury. And you'll notice the different fireplaces and the columns here, they look like marble, but they really aren't marble. It's solid wood, the mantles as well as the pillars. And it was a process called faux painting that was done. And faux is a French term for fake, basically. So they did a process to make it look more expensive than it really was during that time. But artists would paint in the different lines to make it look like marble. And I was told recently that within the modern state capital of Arkansas, in the House of Representatives, that the pillars in there are also faux painted.
What was it like for Civil War era legislators here in Washington? Were they able to move in and out in the middle of a war?
During this time, they met here in Washington, and not all of them could make it. They actually ran into the problem where they didn't meet their quorum, the number of senators and representatives they needed to hold a legal session. So the Arkansas State Supreme Court, who also met here at that time, made a ruling saying that they could, considering the circumstances and the emergency of the situation. So they did have a session here. And the ones that could make it, that were either living here in Washington or behind Confederate lines in Magnolia, Camden, those different towns, were able to make it here during that time.
I know that they moved the capital here to safeguard it from the Union, and at one time it was actually threatened by Union forces.
That's correct. It was part of a larger expedition called the Red River Expedition that included federal forces coming up from Louisiana. They were going up the Red River to take Shreveport, and then General Frederick Steele from Little Rock was supposed to come down the Southwest Trail, take Washington, and then meet them in Shreveport. They would go on into Texas and secure many of the con supplies for the Federal Army that were still in Texas at that time. When Frederick Steele came down this way, the closest he got to Washington was where modern-day Prescott is. It was called Prairie du Chien at that time. There was no town. It was an open prairie with some settlers there, and they met some of the dismounted cavalry. There was only dismounted cavalry up here at that time, and that's usually considered the Battle of Washington is what it's called.
So were the Confederates basically just hanging on by a thin thread here?
Little Rock had fallen, of course, in late '63, and they had elected a Unionist form of government. They had also elected Governor Isaac Murphy. During that time, he was the one legislature that voted against secession at the beginning of the war. And in January of that same year, in 1864, they also hung David O'Dodd. He was a 17-year-old boy, and he was found guilty of treason as a spy during that time.
Were the Confederates ever able to regain ground?
They didn't really gain any ground, but they never lost any either. Short on supplies, while General Frederick Steele was in Camden for 11 days, he sent many of his soldiers out to the neighboring farms to gather up and forage food and so forth for the army during that time. And it's while they were out foraging that they were attacked by the Confederates and lost at the Battle of Poison Springs.
What was Steele's next move?
His next place to go for supplies was Pine Bluff. So he sent some soldiers as well as wagons to go get those supplies, and they were then intercepted by Confederates at the Battle of Marks Mill.
Now, where is Marks Mill?
It's now in Cleveland County, but at the time of the battle in 1864, it was in Bradley County.
To be honest with you, I live in Bradley County, and I haven't heard much about this battle.
Well, it's very strategically important.
Since this is so close to my home, I think I should probably go check it out.
You should.
Well, it looks like you and me are hitting the road.
Today I'm looking for remains of a nearly forgotten Civil War battle. You know, one of the great things about Arkansas is that history is all around us. And that's no different for me here. I've come to my own backyard near Warren, Arkansas, in Cleveland County, just north of Warren, to look at the Battle of Marks Mill battle site. Now, I don't know much about the battle itself, but I brought with me a shovel and a metal detector. Hopefully, with just a little bit of luck, I'll be able to take home a relic from the battle itself. This is part of the fun thing about metal detecting. Sometimes you find things you're not looking for, not expecting. I've basically found what looks to be just an old nail, probably not from the Civil War period. It could be, but it's probably not. But we'll keep our search on and see if we can find anything of more importance. But we keep this first of all. We have found something really special here. This is actually a Confederate bullet. It's a spherical solid shot, and if you could look really close, it's got two little grooves on the inside of it. Now what those are for, this bullet's actually made for a rifle. Now rifles work in one way. On the inside of the barrel of the gun there's little grooves, and what happens is these two grooves on this bullet would actually catch those grooves inside the rifle barrel, would make the shot start spinning, and that creates a more accurate shot. So most likely this would have been used by just a regular infantryman on the front line, or it could have been used by a sniper, but it's a Confederate bullet. Oh, we found another one. This is another good find. Now, this right here is a much different bullet than the one we found earlier. It's actually called an archer shot. It's It's actually a canister bullet. It's pretty small. It's not very big, and that's a plus, especially for the Confederates. This is another Confederate bullet. We found two of them in the same general area, and the reason that's more important is that they're cheaper to make. You don't have to have as much lead, and so you can produce them on a larger quantity, larger scale. It's another rifle bullet. It only has one groove though, so this would have been less accurate than the spherical shot we found earlier. But it's still another great find. Well, I had a lot of fun today. Metal ejecting may be one of my favorite hobbies, especially as a historian. Now, we found a lot of things that we weren't really looking for today, but we found a couple of Civil War era bullets. And in my opinion, that makes this a pretty successful dig. After the Confederate victory at the Battle of Mark's Mill, Union and Southern troops met yet again at Jenkins Ferry. This time it was a draw. One of the most deadly wars in history was coming to a close. It would end in the spring of 1865, when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia. The South had lost its campaign for separation and was once again part of the United States of America. But would that be reality or just a name? How would the nation be rebuilt after tearing itself apart?